Hi everyone, Larissa from the Beekeeper. This video is about what to do for your bees depending on the time of year. This was a recent question I had from one of my students that I thought was actually a really important topic to talk to people about. Because you have your inspection sheet. There are a variety of ones you can find online. We have one in our class that we give people, and it really just helps guide you through checking your beehive. But there are different things you want to keep an eye out for and do for your bees during the spring versus the summer versus the fall and the winter. So we have this in a chart that we made, and if you go to our website at thehappykeeper.com and go to our blog or click the link in the description, it'll take you to the blog post where you can download this PDF. But I wanted to go through it so that you understand what this all means. So we're going to start off in the early spring, and I would not get too caught up in like what month to do this or what day of the year, because I mean some of you might be in New Zealand and Australia, and so your springtime is in a different month. Or what you would do if you had bees in New Hampshire would be very different than what you would do for your bees in North Carolina. What you need to know is early spring, when your bees start leaving the hive in search for food. It's warm enough out, they have broken their cluster, and they are looking for food. And they're probably pretty hungry because they've eaten all or at least most of the food in their hive that you left for them for the winter. So this is when it's usually above 60 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even 55. That's when it's warm enough for the bees to break their cluster. And really just keep an eye out for it, because most important, you need to listen to your bees and what's going on in your environment. Because what goes on even one year with your hives isn't necessarily going to be what they do the next year. So once it's above 60 degrees, you're going to see the bees leaving the hive. However, the hive is going to be very small, very low in population, and this is when the queen is just going to begin to start laying again. You might not even see any brood in the hive. So what you want to do at this time of year is, if they don't have any food, to give them sugar water. And what you do is you make a syrup of 1-to-1 sugar to water. It can be by weight or it can be by volume. And you want to boil that water. Once it's boiling, turn off the heat, add the sugar. Add it slowly and just keep on stirring and stirring and stirring until all of the sugar is dissolved. Then you want to add a little bit of Honey Bee Healthy or some other substance that has those essential oils to help the bees digest the honey, as well as to encourage them to want to eat this sugar syrup. And you put it in a feeder inside your hive. You can make your own feeder by poking holes into the lid of a jar. Just make sure that this feeder is not dripping too much to cause flooding inside your hive, or have a screened bottom under your beehive. Or you can buy a feeder. Just the only kind of feeder I don't recommend are the big plastic black ones that are the size and shape of a deep frame, and you just pour the sugar syrup inside. Those lead to a lot of bees drowning, even if you put some pieces of twigs in there and stuff for them to land on. Okay, so that's mostly what you're concerned about, is them having enough food. And if you bought a package of bees, this isn't so much, this is more so a concern of yours as opposed to if you bought a nuke. Because if you bought a nuke, then that should have come with at least one full frame of honey, and that should be good for the bees until more flowers start to pop up. Now, as say a month into this, that's when you want to start to think about keeping an eye on your varroa mites, especially if this is a beehive that you had last year that survived the winter. You want to do a mite test monthly from here on out, from early mid-spring until you're ready to close up your hive for the winter, because you want to know where your mite levels are. This is a time that you would want to put a treatment in so that you don't have to treat for mites when honey is coming in. A lot of these treatments are in the beehive for 6 or so weeks, and that is a long time that you cannot be harvesting honey. So this is a time to be proactive. It doesn't mean you're going to have a mite infestation. This is a time to be proactive and to see what your levels are. If they are above 4, I recommend putting a treatment in so that your treatment can be out before it gets warm out and the big nectar season has begun. However, this part is it's up to you. So early spring, mid-spring, whenever it's about 60, 70 degrees out, it's warm enough for the bees to leave the hive, but the hive is still small. There's not much blooming. That's what you want to do. Make sure they have enough food and keep an eye on your mites and potentially treat in advance so that you have a low mite level for the honey season. Once it starts to get warmer out, this is late spring, early summer, the flowers are blooming, queens laying lots of eggs, the population explodes. You should have one full deep box. They're filling up the second box, probably half brood, half honey. This is when you want to definitely do a mite test every single month, and you want to make sure they have enough room in the beehive. This is not only adding honey supers to the top of the beehive, but making sure there are empty frames within the brood boxes. And this is to prevent swarming. So those are the two things you want to do when the hive is very active, which is usually summertime, the big nectar season. Make sure they have enough room, prevent swarming, which is kind of, they're the same thing. You do the same thing for both. You prevent swarming by making sure they have enough room. Not just enough room for honey, but enough room for brood. Once you start to see the brood section getting taken over with pollen, you need to do something ASAP, or your hive is going to start producing queen cells and they will swarm. You don't want to prevent swarming once you see queen cells with eggs in them already, or capped queen cells. It's too late. At that point, you're just going to then be splitting the hive. And that brings me to the next thing you can do. You can split your hives. Now, when you choose to split your hives, it's usually right before or right after that big nectar season, if what you're concerned about is getting lots of honey. If you don't care about getting in the maximum amount of honey, you can split your hive anytime between spring, summer, and fall. You just need to make sure you have enough brood for the split and the original hive. So once your hive starts to slow down a little bit, say you put that last honey super on and it was totally empty and they haven't really touched it, maybe they drew out comb in one of the frames that were empty that you put inside the hive are still empty, that's when your nectar season has ended, and that's when you can harvest. After you harvest, this is usually late summer, maybe early fall, this is when you really have to treat for mites. And this is your late summer, early fall set of duties. You are now done trying to prevent your hive from swarming. You're done adding honey supers onto your hive. You want to harvest, and then you want to treat for mites. And this is for winter preparation, because it's very important to have a low mite level in the late summer, early fall, not before you close up your hive. And that's because this is when the queen is starting to lay her eggs for the winter bees. Winter bees are going to be the bees in your hive, taking care of the hive throughout the winter. They have a little bit higher fat reserve, and they need to have no mites on them while they are developing. And so while they're developing in the hive, this is late summer, early fall, that's when you need no mites. So the mites, most of the mites in your hive are with the baby bees, feeding off of those bees, laying their eggs on those bees. They are not on the adult bees. Maybe 10% of the mites in your hive are on adult bees. 90% are on the baby bees in the cells. So it's very important that as soon as you finish your big summer harvest, you treat for mites, not with oxalic acid, because that will not get to the brood. You need to do a mite treatment that will be in there for 6 or so weeks, or a treatment that gets to the mites in the brood as well as the mites on the adult bees. And that's your late summer, early fall duties, really. You can also feed them, again, sugar syrup to just help them build up any extra honey reserves for preparation for the winter. Now, in the fall, before it's cold enough that they'll be clustering again, you might get a fall harvest. This isn't honey that you really want to harvest and bring in. This is honey that the bees are bringing in, say from the goldenrod. It's a very popular harvest. So just make sure they have some room to bring in this extra honey, and keep feeding them sugar syrup so that they have as much honey as possible stored up for the winter. Now once it gets below 65 or so, that's when you want to start preparing for the winter. And the winter doesn't have much for you to do. You just need to do a lot to prepare them. You want to make sure they're insulated. You want to make sure they have enough food storage. You want to make sure that they have very low mite levels. And you want to make sure that they have ventilation and a way for that hot air to get out so that condensation does not build up within your hive. So there are lots of places you can learn about how to winterize your hive. But for now, you just need to know that once it starts to get cooler out, but still warm enough that you can open up your beehive, that's when you want to prepare your hive for winter. Make sure that you have the food, the brood on the bottom, you have something to absorb that moisture, and your hive is ready. And you also want to make sure you do one last mite treatment. And I know you might be thinking, I just did a treatment in the late summer, like a month or two ago. You want to do one last treatment before you close up that hive, and the reason why is because in that fall, when you were feeding your bees sugar syrup, it was still warm out, but not many flowers are blooming. The bees were robbing each other like crazy, and especially your strong hives are going to have an insanely high mite level because all the bees in the neighborhood were coming to their hive to rob from them, and in the process dropping off their mites in that hive. So the strongest hives are usually the ones that don't make it through the winter, and that's because they got to winter with a really high mite level on their bees. So you want to do one last mite treatment, and this treatment is usually with oxalic acid because it works really well to get the mites off of the bees' backs. It doesn't work for killing the mites in the brood, but it will kill the mites that are on the bees. So you can just do one puff with a vaporizer of the oxalic acid, and your bees should be healthy and ready to cluster up for the winter. Throughout the winter, once you're done setting them up for their winter cluster, the only thing you really have to do is make sure that they have ventilation. So this is going over there, say once a week, taking your hive tool and scraping out any dead bees that might be blocking up that lower entrance. And you also want to make sure that if it snowed, that it's not building up and blocking that front entrance, and that there is ventilation and air, and that they have food. Now at first, for those first couple of months, they should have enough food. You should have put at least 50 pounds of honey on that hive. If not honey, then white sugar. But say around January, you want to start to go to the hive and just tip it a little bit, just get a feel for how much it weighs. And you should have an idea of how much it weighed when you first left it, when you first closed it up for the winter. And that'll give you an idea of whether they are eating through all of their food storage and need some extra food. So if they do need some extra food, what you want to do is wait till you have a warm, sunny day, and you want to just throw in some white sugar underneath the telescoping inner cover where you have your sugar backup. It's either going to be a candy board or white sugar. Throw it in there. You don't want to open up the brood box. You don't want to really see any bees. You just want to put it in under that outer cover. And that's pretty much all you do for the winter. Make sure that they have some ventilation and make sure they have some food. So then once it gets to early spring again, before it's warm enough that you can open that hive, like 60 degrees or warmer, you want to continue to do that, especially make sure they have enough food. But you can't give them sugar syrup until it's warm enough for them to leave the hive. One very important reason why is because that sugar syrup has a lot of moisture in it, and when that evaporates, it's going to create condensation within the hive, and that condensation can kill a hive. So you really don't want to put any kind of moisture and liquid inside your beehive. So quick recap: early spring, once it's over 55, 60 degrees out, when you start to see the bees leaving the hive, that's when you can open it every other week or so and feed them sugar syrup if needed. Once it is, say, a month or so into the queen laying, that's when you want to start doing your mite tests and treat for mites in that springtime so that you don't have to treat in the summer if your mite level is over 4 or so. Once it starts to get really warm out and the queen is laying and the hive is active and there's lots of flowers blooming, usually late spring, early summer, that's when you want to prevent swarming. Make sure there's lots of room within the hive for the bees to bring in honey and lots of room for the queen to lay. in the late summer, early fall, once the bees stop bringing in honey and building honeycomb, this is when you want to harvest. When you're done harvesting, this is when you want to put a mite treatment in. Not oxalic acid, but another type of mite treatment that will get to the bees within the cells of the developing bees, as well as the mites on the bees' backs. This is when the queen is laying for the winter bees. And this is also when you can start to feed sugar syrup or pollen patties if you don't have much pollen in the hive. Once it gets below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you want to take the sugar syrup out. And this is the start of your fall, early winter duties. You want to start prepare the hive for winter, treat with oxalic acid before you close it up, and take out the sugar syrup. Once winter time comes and your hive is closed up, all you want to do is make sure that that lower entrance is clear and that there are no bees, dead bees blocking that lower entrance, or snow or flooding going on. And once it gets past January and that later winter, you want to start to check the hive and make sure they have enough food. So again, you can click the link in the description and you can download our PDF, which is a little chart to help guide you. You can print it out, put it in your inspection book to help remind you of what you should be doing when. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, I hope you click the thumbs up button, subscribe to watch more of our videos and get notified about when they come up. We will be putting out new videos every single week. And if you have any questions or other things you want to add in, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys and see where you're keeping your bees and what you're up to and what topics you would like to hear about.